Welcome, everyone. I typically say hello, beautifuls, but today is a special edition. It is Diabetes Alert Day. And if you're not familiar with Diabetes Alert Day, it actually was a day that started to bring awareness by the American Diabetes Association, a day where we could get educated on diabetes throughout the day, a 24-hour period. And so today's special edition is a segment I'm most graciously honored and humbled at the same time to be able to sit and chat with Dr. Wayman Wendell Cheatham. Not only is Dr. Cheatham, in my opinion, Dr. Community, and we'll talk a little bit about why I've termed him Dr. Community, because he has well over 4 decades of experience in the diabetes space. He served as a board certified endocrinologist. He is an expert in diabetes and metabolism. He served on multiple boards. I will tell y'all, I have multiple pages on you, Dr. Cheatham. Proud to know that this is not only a privilege, but how often can we say that we can sit down and have a real chat and understand something as serious as diabetes and how it's affecting our community, and the fact that you would volunteer your time to come on board and help us out with this topic. So, welcome, and please tell our listeners a little bit about you.
Wow. Well, thank you very much. I didn't realize you had done some background investigation on me, but that's fine. I don't think there's much there that I might be embarrassed about, but I am happy that I had an opportunity to serve both as an endocrinologist in the United States Army when I was on active duty, and then to have a private practice in endocrinology, metabolism, and diabetes in Maryland, and operated that private practice for essentially 15 years, although part of that time I also was beginning work in the pharmaceutical industry, and ultimately transitioned from that private practice to leading research and development in 3 different pharmaceutical companies over a 15-year period of time to help produce medications such as insulins, fast-acting insulins, long-duration insulins, as well as oral medications to help individuals achieve glucose control for their diabetes. And then ultimately, I went to work for a research organization in the Baltimore, Washington area, and finally was recruited by the Surgeon General of the United States Navy to assist him in overseeing medical research in the Navy laboratories, which were located around the world, and help give him advice in regard to what could be done or should be done in regard to improvement of the care and well-being given to active duty military personnel. And now I'm retired. I dedicate my time to providing feedback and give back to the communities that actually gave me a foundation. So I volunteer in Baltimore, and I also provide resource and substance for various activities that are operating around the world, largely in underserved communities. Most recently, I was providing health education and support to the Aborigines in Australia, who are a deprived group of individuals, the original inhabitants of Australia, but who were supplanted by Western powers back in the 1700s, and now find themselves at risk because of the clash between Western diets, Western lifestyle, their traditional lifestyle, and their genetic makeup. So with that long-winded answer to your question, as you know me well, I'll be quiet and let you lead me into what you'd like for me to discuss with our group of listeners today.
I think you did a thorough job with that summary because I mean, in that short period of time, if listeners don't recognize that you're a world-renowned clinician, that you have beyond private practice, the pharmaceutical industry, research, you've gone full circle. So in this conversation, we can touch on quite a few of the questions that we know people want to know. We're going to talk about some of the medications. We'll talk about you mentioned Australia. I think some people, when we think of diabetes, we're only thinking about Baltimore. We're only thinking about Black people, but it is a condition that affects the world globally, and you have frontline experience in that. So, um, the basics is where we can start, Dr. Cheatham. We have an idea of what diabetes. I would love to focus on type 2 diabetes because of its prevalence. If you could just give us the foundation of really what does diabetes do to our bodies and why is it so important for us to act fast with the
Yes, yes,
diagnosis?
right. Well, thank you for that opportunity because that is key. Individuals need to understand what diabetes is and what it does to individuals within their bodies that causes such severe disruption of health and conditions that lead to individuals becoming invalids or even causing sudden death and disability. Many people think diabetes is just high sugar and that it comes from eating too much sugar. And that is false. That is a misinterpretation of what diabetes really is. A sign of diabetes is that the blood sugar becomes elevated, but that is by no means all there is to diabetes. That elevated blood sugar is just a sign that there are scores of other biological and chemical disorders that are occurring in the body that lead to cell death, to compromise of nerve function, to compromise of your immunity, to increase in inflammation and arthralgias, and ultimately could even lead to sudden death, stroke, and loss of limbs because of blockages of blood vessels. And the key here is that the high blood sugar needs to be paid attention to because we know that since it's a sign that there's a disruption, that if we see the blood sugars going back down toward normal, that we are making some improvement. But it's not just getting the blood sugar down. And unfortunately, it's only after many people suffer the consequences of diabetes and its complications that they come in for more in-depth education and understanding. And they find out that there are a lot of other things that they could have been doing and that they should have been doing and that they should have been told to do that they really did not understand well. And the reason why this opportunity to talk with you and your listeners today is so important is because it gives us an understanding to broaden that perspective, that view of diabetes beyond just people thinking, oh, well, it's just high sugar and I won't say anything about it. It's important because I was looking at some statistics recently, and for individuals born as recently as the year 2000, as recently as the year 2000, individuals in the ethnic so-called minority communities, the non-dominant population, the risk of those individuals born in the year 2000 of developing diabetes over their lifespan is over 50%. Over half of people born in the year 2000 will be at risk of developing full-blown diabetes at some point during their lifespan. And all of those complications, the heart attacks, the strokes, the kidney failure, the amputations, the disease and disorder, all could be prevented if we could help those people not develop diabetes.
Absolutely. Wow. That you said so many things, especially this focus on elevated glucose, elevated blood sugar. That's one thing, but it's more of a sign to what else is happening to that entire metabolic system as a result of it. And I think of this one question. We know diabetes is a progressive disease, but let's talk a little bit about glucose numbers. I know my ladies love talking about A1C versus fasting glucose, but A1C tends to be what they understand a little bit well. If you could give us some ranges a bit, where do we want to be? And if we are elevated, and what is the not so great place to be, and what does that mean for our bodies? What is our body's response when we
Sure,
start thinking about A1C into these double digits and so forth?
sure. Well, let's expand the concept of A1C and what that really means, because when I first started practicing endocrinology, we didn't have A1C tests available. We only had the ability to measure blood sugar levels, blood glucose. And I can remember individuals coming into my office and showing me their results of doing blood glucose tests at home and showing me that things look pretty good most of the time. But it became apparent to me that they only checked their blood sugar at certain times of day because that's when they could get the best values, and that they wouldn't check at other times of day when perhaps they might have from time to time, but found the blood sugars were high and just didn't like seeing those. Well, ultimately, as time went on, the hemoglobin A1C test, the A1C test came along, and it gave us the ability to determine what the average blood sugar had been over a period of about 3 months. It actually is a little bit longer than 3 months, but it tells us what the average blood sugar has been. So it takes into account all of those blood sugar values that were in the best category, but also measures through the day those elevations in blood sugar that occur after a meal, that occur when a person has perhaps eaten something that they should not have eaten or that they didn't know would raise their blood sugar, or other changes such as stress and other situations that would raise their blood sugar. And so we came to the realization that individuals needed to have this long-term blood sugar test determination, the hemoglobin A1C. Normal A1C levels should be no higher than 5.6. 5.6% of the hemoglobin level in the blood being measured should be of A1C characteristic. And it usually ranges in normal terms between about 4.1 and up to about 5.6. 5.7 is the area where we have determined, according to measuring other outcome complications that can occur in diabetes, that individuals are in a category that we call pre-diabetes. That is to say, things are not normal, but they aren't in the category where perhaps on a somewhat artificial basis, we would say that they had diabetes. So from 5.7 up to around 6.4%, we would say, well, that's in the pre-diabetes stage. And then anything above 6.4, we would say that's definitely diabetes. Now, why definitely diabetes? Because we have associated severe complications that occur in individuals when their A1Cs or when their average blood sugar would translate to being above 6.4% on a hemoglobin A1C test. And the higher you go above 6.4, the more severe and the greater the number of complications that can occur in an individual over a period of time because their A1Cs are in that area or their average blood sugar has been in that area. And that then corrects for some misapprehension or misunderstanding that people would have that would say, oh, if my fasting blood sugar is good, then I'm good and I don't need to worry. And they never test or know what their blood sugar is after they've eaten a meal, a high fat meal, a high simple complex carbohydrate meal, or a high calorie containing meal. They wouldn't know that those elevated excursions later on, after they have already measured what looked like a good blood sugar level, were what were causing complications and severe complications that we associate with diabetes.
That is, thank you for breaking that down. As someone who's diagnosed with type 2, the big goal, of course, we know should be education so that they can find a way to begin to successfully manage it. I know people in the double digits with A1C, and I think we want to know, is it these lifestyle changes? I think some people may hesitate to believe how powerful lifestyle changes can be. So, as a physician, if you had to prescribe a medication for someone who has type 2 diabetes because you're concerned about their numbers, how critical are the lifestyle changes in conjunction with the medication?
Well, that's a great question. The fact is that the medications in and of themselves, by themselves, do not work very well and do not control things very well without implementing lifestyle change as well. People who have been through diabetes education courses recognize that they are instructed to do things on a regular basis. At certain times of day, they're going to do such and such. Now, that's not overcomplicating their lifestyle. It's just helping to regiment things so that the medications that they may be prescribed can help and assist. But many individuals don't realize that they might not even have to take medications if they would just allow lifestyle change to take effect and take hold, so that by listening to what their dietitian, nutritionist, and diabetes educator, diabetes coach is telling them and implementing it, they could avoid having to spend lots of money, worry about where they're going to get their medication, whether the pharmacy has it, or even having to compromise themselves to take medications, as opposed to just eating more naturally. And let me emphasize that the lifestyle change that we recommend actually returns individuals from an abusive lifestyle, a detrimental lifestyle, to the kind of lifestyle that their bodies were intended to follow all along. You know, many of us have a history of African heritage, and that African heritage, at least here in the United States, came about because of the economic routine, I'll use that term, of putting people into slavery, into bondage. And we abhor, we frown at that. We fight against it. And we say we're not going to let anyone do that to us as a group again. And we're going to watch carefully for those signs of what people may have done to us or what we may have experienced during slavery. But what we don't understand is that during slavery, because these people were deprived of certain healthful and rich and nutritious foods in their diet, they were given the cast-offs, the foods that people didn't otherwise want. They learned to survive on trying to make those cast-off foods taste good. And then they began to develop a routine and a culture that centered around those foods. But they had to do a lot of things to those foods to get them to taste good and to be palatable. Because these people were working hard in the fields, sometimes 12, sometimes 14 hours a day, working muscular, exercise, lifting, hoeing, cooking, stirring pots, making bread, being very active, they burned a lot of calories. So a lot of the changes that they made to their cast off foods to make them taste better also gave them calories so that they could survive. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, we look back on that, and because those recipes have been handed down, we have started or haven't started, we have continued to use those recipes and eat those foods in our lifestyle. And we call it soul food. Mm-hmm. And we really should use another word that starts with an S to describe those foods, because those foods and those diets were slave foods. They were foods that the slaves learned to eat to keep themselves nutritious, because they had to taste the food, they had to be willing to use it, and it had to give them enough calories to keep alive. Now that we live in a modern environment, in a culture where we have automated this, automated that, mechanized this and mechanized that, our lifestyle is completely different. But if we continue to eat those cast off foods with high fat, high salt, high carbohydrate or sugar content, we damage our body. And what we try to teach people on a nutritional basis, on a dietary basis, is how to eat naturally, the way the good Lord intended for us to live and to survive, and on what foods were provided to grow naturally and to be used naturally, as opposed to being abused with these abusive cast-off foods that we somehow developed a means to give a palatable taste to, but now we can't get rid of, and those foods are killing us.
And I love the comparison. I know we can see it easily when we think back that we're dying at an alarming rate.
Yes.
And that what would be the difference when we look at these culturally exclusive foods, when we look at this soul food and we compare it to generations before us that outlived us? What were they doing? One, they were growing the food from the farm. They knew exactly where it came from. And there was no such thing as a sedentary lifestyle because everyone had to move. So then we take a love for that food. And as you mentioned, Dr. Cheatham, everything is buy here, get it here. 5 seconds, here it is. And so we have, that sounds like there's time to turn the dial culturally, that it's time to pivot as a culture and change these things up. Because if we continue at the rate that we're in, you mentioned that shocking statistic. The American Diabetes Association has been saying that for quite a while, that we are literally less than 30 years from looking at seeing half of Americans, 50%, with type 2 diabetes. So could you describe, we know what we run into if we are constantly eating those foods high in fat, high in sugar. We know the difference between a candy bar and a healthier carb. Those things we know. But if you could describe the diabetes plate, what should we be eating every day?
Sure. Certainly. All right. And by the way, we will also, for those of you who are wondering, we will move beyond even the nutrition and the diet, and we'll talk about the exercise and other components of the lifestyle change. That just occurred to me as I rehearsed in my mind what we've just been talking about. But what we need to do now is we need to get away from foods and ingredients that are highly refined. We need to get away from foods and recipes that include high fat content. And I include, when I say fat, oils even. And we need to get away from foods that are highly salted. Unfortunately, years ago, to preserve various forms of food, we learned to salt the food so that would extend its life. But we developed a taste for salted foods, and unfortunately, a lot of meats, for example, cold cuts, foods that people will buy at the deli, foods that people will put into those sandwiches that you'd go past the sandwich shop to get very quickly, those subs that have lots of salted and preserved meats in them would be a problem. But the other thing is we also need to know how some foods are made up that we don't even think about and don't understand have detrimental ingredients. Many people don't understand, for example, that cheese, just cheese, which comes from the milk of cows. Usually that's how cheese is made. There is goat cheese and there are other forms of cheese, but the paradigm is the same. Cheese on a caloric basis gets 70 to 80% of its calories from fat, pure fat. The protein content is much lower in contributing any nutrition to cheese, although years ago we used to think cheese was a great food. We were misinformed because there were certain industries that made a lot of money off of people using milk products. And so they influenced even the way the government talked about these foods. But think about it now. If 70 to 80% of cheese calories comes from fat, and where does that fat come from? That's beef fat. The cow does not have a switch that says, oh, if I'm going to put fat on my muscle so that people can have steaks with fat around it, and then they can cut that fat off, or we tell them to cut it off, that's one kind of fat, or the fat that I put out in my milk is completely different. It's not completely different. It's beef fat. It's highly saturated, high in cholesterol, and it's going to cause significant problems. Now, there are other things that can be used to substitute for cheese, but also be aware of the fact that even some of the vegan cheeses, meaning no animal products, have had lots of oils, vegetable oils added to them to make them have a consistency of cheese. So you have to read the labels carefully, because oil, and we may not get into this completely, but oil and fat in the diet is an anti-insulin. Oil and fat that a person eats and takes in goes through the intestine into the liver and actually will shut down the ability of insulin, which comes from the pancreas and which controls how much sugar the liver itself makes, because your liver makes tremendous amounts of sugar when you're fasting. That's how you stay alive. But the liver is supposed to stop producing that sugar when you eat. But if you're eating a high-fat diet, the liver doesn't obey the signal that's coming from any insulin that either you produce or any insulin you take. The liver just keeps on producing sugar. So you're getting calories not only from what you've eaten, but your liver still thinks that you haven't eaten, and the liver is still putting out sugar. And so you're doubling up on what's happening because of fat. The liver will even use amino acids that come from protein that you eat to turn into sugar. So the liver is nonstop in producing sugar unless it gets a signal to stop making sugar. And the way the liver gets the signal to stop making sugar is because of the insulin that is produced by the pancreas or insulin that a person takes by injection that will tell the liver to stop. And fat blocks that. So fat is a horrible ingredient in our foods. Now, fat is important because we need some vitamins that are only found or can be contributed to by fat, but we don't need high fat diets. So complex carbohydrates are important for us. Complex carbohydrates because they have fiber in them and they have to be broken down in order to be absorbed. So the carbohydrate, which can turn into sugar, is slowed in its going through the intestinal tract. And so we talk about people eating whole grain breads, using whole grain flour, whole wheat flour, rye flour. We talk about individuals using brown rice, which means it's rice that still has the coating on the rice seed, as opposed to white polished rice, which many cultures hold up high as being more uh, desirable in terms of lifestyle, but which is detrimental. Or even white potatoes. White potatoes do a real number on people when it comes to blood sugar control. And believe it or not, sweet potatoes with their natural sugar in them, but because they're so high in fiber, actually are handled better by a person with diabetes than white potatoes are. That is, if the person who's eating sweet potatoes doesn't put sugar and corn syrup and other sweeteners on the potatoes. Just don't do that. Eat the potatoes as sweet potatoes. They'll taste sweet to you and they'll be good. So, again, long winded, but hopefully that helps out. We have to get a source of protein. We have to have carbohydrates. We have to have some fats, but natural foods, the foods that grow in the fields, combine all of those things in the right concentrations and consistencies that we need so that we don't have to add all of these foreign and detrimental ingredients that throw our metabolism out of whack. Now, if we don't have the genes for diabetes, and if we haven't developed diabetes, our bodies can sometimes definitely adapt to do a better job of handling these foreign substances. But if we have diabetes, there's a major problem present, and we need to baby our systems to give them back what they were naturally designed to use. The natural diet is called natural for a reason, because it's what we should normally have. And therefore, we can eat and be healthy. Now, I also mentioned exercise because exercise is important, but I'll wait to get some more questions from you and maybe I can work that in.
Oh, we are definitely moving in that direction because we are literally sleeping on the power of exercise as medicine. So we're going to talk about the power of medicine to the body. It sounds like even from a nutrition perspective, we don't have to be rocket scientists in this. If we learn the power of cleaner eating, if we recognize the difference between least processed foods, that we desire to not have bleached rice and bleached breads in our diet, that we're brown people, we should be okay with the brown breads and a brown.
Good. That's right. That's right.
There's a simple way to this, and we know that in quite a few of our neighborhoods, that it's just what we have right at that corner, or what we have access to. We have to find loopholes around that because that does not mean that that's the only thing, that they are our only options. There are ways that we can still be resilient enough to eat healthier with what we have. Now, let's talk about that exercise thing because I know There are some who may not recognize how powerful exercise can be, especially if we all need it. But what is that secret sauce to a person with type 2 diabetes and exercise?
Sure. So as you sort of alluded to, as part of my checkered past, my multiple areas of involvement during my professional career, uh, I served as one of the principal investigators of what was known as the Diabetes Prevention Program. That was a US government sponsored research investigation that looked at what would happen if you took a group of people that you identified were at risk of developing diabetes, but hadn't met the criteria for having diabetes yet. What if you intervened and taught them nutritious eating and exercise as part of a lifestyle change? And what we found was in 58% of the people who we identified, and we recruited thousands of people to be in these studies. These research centers were located all around the country at major cities in the north, in the south, in the east, and the west, people from a diverse background, ethnicities, and so forth. And we taught them how to eat nutritiously and instituted a program with monitors that actually would help them, coaches that would help them periodically, several times a week. They would get a telephone call or encouragement. If we could get those people to exercise by walking, they didn't have to lift weights. They didn't have to go to the gym. They just needed to walk. If they would walk for 30 minutes or more, 3 times a week, 30 minutes or more, 3 times a week of continuous walking, and they instituted this change in lifestyle, this dietary change, 58% of the total number of people who were at risk for developing type 2 diabetes didn't develop it, compared to a comparison group that weren't taught the lifestyle change and were not exercising 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week. So we're not talking about people disrupting their schedules. Oh my, I can't do that because I have to work so much. And how am I going to do that? No, it's a regular, programmed process where you work certain things into your routine and you exercise. Now, the more you exercise, the better it is. And if you can go to a gym or a spa or an organized recruitment or instructed group who can be exercised as well, you have an even greater chance, we believe, of avoiding type 2 diabetes. And in fact, we now know that people who have gone on and already passed over the line and have diabetes can reverse their diabetes by lifestyle change, including exercise. Now, we talked a little bit about the medications. Some people are genetically made up so that they've done things in their earlier lives, or they have so many genes that have been accumulated that they are going to develop blood sugar, cholesterol, and lipid metabolism problems that we would call diabetes, and they can't get rid of it completely, but they can make it better, and they can give the medications that they take a chance of being more effective to control their blood sugars, even if they have already developed diabetes. But exercise cannot be done away with. It's important. Our bodies were made to move. Why do you think we have all these joints in our body? You think the good Lord could have made us just as blobs, you
Yeah.
know? we could have all been like Jabba the Hutts,
Yeah.
okay? And wouldn't need any joints. But we were given beautifully constructed joints in our youth, in our childhood, as we developed, as we came along, that worked very well. It's our lifestyle, in most cases, that has caused destruction of these joints so that we find ourselves in middle age and beyond hobbling around and being restricted because of arthritis and arthralgias. By the way, I didn't get into it, but one of the key factors in developing inflammation in the body and in the joints is the fat that we take in our diets. Fat and lipids are keen instigators of inflammation in the body that can affect our joints, can affect our blood vessels, can affect our muscles, and can even lead to problems in our heart and in our dental and digestive system in general.
Mm. It's the power of lifestyle, making those changes. I see so many women uh, getting ready to get on the table with knee replacements, hip replacements. And we know while outside of maybe something went wrong, maybe there was an accident, maybe something genetic, that we know a large majority of those instances are from the sedentary lifestyle, coupled with, as you mentioned, what this influx of inflammation does to the body when we are constantly taking in way more fat and processed foods than we should, that we are literally abusing the body
Yes.
in those words. Now, there's a lot of talk about these weight loss medications. There's a huge wave. And I know that on one end, we want people to lose weight so that they can be healthier. But we know that that weight can come back if lifestyle changes are not a part of that prescription. So, you mentioned earlier, Dr. Cheatham, that the some medications, I won't be able to quote you right, quote you to the nine, but that these medications may serve a purpose, but that purpose is not to put you in a better place or the ideal place unless it is coupled with lifestyle changes. But what's the craze with these weight loss drugs, and how could they help or not help a person?
Yes. Well, tremendous question. And one of the things that I lament in terms of my being fully retired now from the practice of endocrinology is that I am not actively able to evaluate individuals and put the appropriate individuals on some medications that now we have recently discovered will help individuals to lose weight, but also help to control their blood sugars. Now, these are not just simple weight loss drugs. These aren't medications that a person takes and its whole purpose is just to take their appetite away. And that helps them to lose weight because we know that those medications do other bad things to the body, some of them. And when a person stops taking them, they gain the weight right back again, and they really haven't learned anything differently. But there are newer medications, medications that involve activation or substitution for, because some of the medications are synthetic, but they also do the same thing as naturally occurring hormones were supposed to do in a person who didn't develop an abnormality of metabolism where the hormone, the natural hormone that these medications now substitute for, they've developed a condition where that hormone isn't there and goes away. And what I'm talking about are medications that go in the class of GLP-1 medications, an analog. An analog means it's analogous. It is similar to, like, and it does much of what the natural hormone would do. GLP-1 is a natural hormone. It's made in the intestine. Also, small amounts of it is made in the brainstem. And I'll tell you about that in just a moment. But the GLP-1 that's in the intestine is there because when you eat and your food goes into the intestine firsthand knows that you've eaten. And so the GLP-1 is reduced from cells in the intestine, go through the bloodstream to the liver, play a role in the liver in making the liver more sensitive to the effects of insulin. But they also go directly to the pancreas and make the pancreas wake up and be aware of the fact that the blood sugar is going up, so that the pancreas will stop sleeping and not put out the insulin it needs to put out, but will actually put out insulin that then will also go to the liver, help the liver to not produce that extra glucose, and will also go around to the rest of the body. So these medications help in that regard. But the other thing that they do is they send a signal to the brain that tells the brain that the person has eaten, that they should not be hungry anymore. And the hunger pang goes away so that the person doesn't want to eat anymore. Many people with type 2 diabetes find that they have a problem with overeating. Their portion sizes are too big and they can't seem to get enough. And they'll go back for a second course of things. What we found is that when you have a person who is now capable of taking these GLP-1 like medications, they don't have those hunger pangs. They find they cannot even finish the first portions that they've put on their plates, and they lose weight. Some of these people lose as much as 30 or 40 pounds of weight just because they're taking these medications. Now, some people have to start very slowly on these medications because they can cause digestive symptoms, bloating, gaseousness, and other things that people don't like. But in the proper hands of a skilled practitioner, these medications can be started slowly and can assist. And what we found out when I was still practicing, in fact, when I was just coming out of training, but it took us that long now to be able to get these medications, was that GLP-1 production in people with type 2 diabetes was defective, that GLP-1 was not being produced. But we didn't understand all of what GLP-1 was supposed to do. We just knew that there was something called GLP-1 that we could synthesize, we could pull it out of the intestines of healthy animals, and we could study it in the laboratory. And now we've come fully around to the fact where there are medications where you can produce GLP-1-like molecules that people can take. There's also another hormone known as GIP that has an even greater role in helping to cause satiety and cause a person to feel like they don't need to eat anymore. These are quite different from medications of 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago that took a person's appetite away through other means, but they didn't do anything about the metabolism or helping the insulin to be secreted or helping the insulin to work more effectively. That's how these medications work. And as time goes on, hopefully we'll be able to see even greater advancement in these incretin, incretin, incretin medications, hormones that come naturally from the body when a person isn't ill or diseased, with examples with type 2 diabetes, but then can now be replaced by a person taking either an injection or in some cases, just taking a tablet of these medications to replace the missing GLP-1.
That is a lot. it's a lot to take in a good way, because it's a reminder that GLP-1 is actually produced in the body naturally, that we have our own and we can activate it. But if someone's health is compromised, like with type 2, it could be defective. And this is where a synthetic version of it could be of support.
Right.
Hmm. Something for our listeners to think of, because the body is amazing. Now,
It is.
you also mentioned, how can we're getting close to time, but describe reversal, diabetes reversal. I have heard remission recently at an event with, I'll just say it, with Hopkins and a number of people. We get together every year. We finally had a physician say reverse type 2 diabetes. Why are we not educating our patients on reversing? What is it? How do you do it? Is it even possible?
So, so you reverse diabetes by taking away those lifestyle factors that help to tip an already compromised metabolic system over into the category of diabetes. Remember, we talked about people who were pre-diabetic. They weren't normal. They didn't have those A1Cs less than 5.7, but they weren't above 6.4. They don't have true diabetes yet, but they are at risk. And in fact, I would tell you that many of those people who are in that pre-diabetes state are still developing some disease processes in organs that diabetes that's full-blown affects. And that's because of this. Remember, I started off by telling people diabetes is not just high blood sugar. Diabetes is not caused by eating too much sugar. But if you have diabetes, you can't eat lots of sugar because it'll just make the situation worse. But it's not just the sugar that does damage. Now, high sugar does do damage. Sugar itself does damage. Sugar will damage the eyes directly. High sugar will damage the eyes, and people will develop blindness because of changes that take place in the back of the eyes to the blood vessels and to the ability of the eye retina to receive enough oxygen through blockages of those blood vessels. And high sugar will damage the kidneys and cause the kidneys to stop working appropriately. But there are other things that take place. There are lipid abnormalities, high cholesterol, high inflammation in the body, and other things that take place as part of diabetes that damage other organs. And then ultimately, that abnormality that takes place in the liver not only allows the liver to produce more of these inflammation compounds that circulate through the body and cause damage in general. These inflammation compounds go into the blood vessels, the major blood vessels, the ones that serve the brain and that serve the heart. And those inflammation compounds are there so that when the person perhaps also has high blood pressure, which tends to go along with diabetes, and those blood vessels are expanding and expanding and expanding, they get little rips and tears in them. And the inflammation and the high cholesterol and lipids cause problems in those blood vessels. And ultimately, the liver also produces something that helps the blood to clot. It's actually supposed to be a mechanism to help us when we are threatened or perhaps are injured, but it helps the blood to clot, and the blood becomes more clotting, has greater ability to clot as it is circulating. And so when these blood vessels under high pressure, bounding high blood pressure, cracks occur in the vessels, inflammation takes place there, then platelets and these chemicals that are circulating, that are made in the liver, cause clots to form in those blood vessels. So people who have been going for years not taking care of their diabetes. And maybe they think they're getting by and they're doing fine. Oh, yeah, I have to get up once or twice at night to urinate, or, I have to be careful because all during the day I have to go to the bathroom. And that's my high blood sugar, and I'll just take care of it. They don't realize that many people have sudden death because these changes take place because of other chemicals, not due to sugar, but due to other problems that are part of the diabetes picture that cause these blood vessels to close off suddenly due to blockages. And oh, yes, in my male counterparts out there, the difficulty that men have as they grow older and have problems with impotence, not able to perform sexually like they may have been able to back in the earlier years, is terribly influenced by not only exposing the blood vessels and the tissues in the genital area, in the reproductive area, to high sugar, but blockages of the blood vessels that are occurring due to the high sugar, but also closing off due to cholesterol and inflammation. That's not just the high sugar. That's other things that are occurring due to diabetes. And guess what? Lifestyle change would have prevented that if they had instituted it early enough. Now, once you develop many of these changes, it's difficult to reverse, but some of it can be reversed. You can decrease the inflammation, and you can decrease the risk that you're going to form these clots and these clotting substances in the blood. You can reduce your cholesterol and triglycerides and other harmful lipids in the body, and you can extend the function of these various critical areas in the eyes, blood vessels to the brain, blood vessels to the heart, blood vessels to the genital areas, kidneys, by improving your lifestyle. So improving your lifestyle is the key. As I said before, and toward the beginning, the medications will work to some degree, but the medications won't solve the problem. Lifestyle has to be the basis, getting your act together. And it's not hard. Remember, I talked about walking 30 minutes for 3 times a week? Now, and also weight loss. Some people think, oh, I'm so overweight, and I'm going to set this goal, and I'm going to lose these 40 pounds or these 50 pounds. I need to lose them. Well, guess what? The people in the diabetes prevention program who achieved that 58% reduction in the risk for diabetes, they only lost 7%, 7% of their starting body weight. They only lost 7%. That means if they weighed 200 pounds, they lost 14 pounds. If they weighed 300 pounds, they lost 21 pounds over time. They didn't have to lose 100 pounds. They didn't have to starve themselves. We're not talking about starving yourself. We're talking about living a better and more natural lifestyle.
Absolutely. That was a wonderful way to summarize that. Sometimes I think what seems simple doesn't seem like it works. You say, what? Eat more vegetables? What? Get some good sleep? Get out there and walk for 30 minutes? It is powerful. And I have to make time for this, Dr. Cheatham, and that is just to highlight the amazing work that's happening in West Baltimore as a result of your efforts and a number of the doctors, partners, I don't know a better word, their stakeholders invested at the Kirk Center there. But I want our listeners to know that once a month, the first Saturday of each month, you and your team, you are dedicated to uh, doing some, you're doing some screenings, but I'll tell you the education that comes along on the first Saturday of the month. If you enjoyed this conversation, imagine the PowerPoints and the visuals and just coming to learn and understand not just the way health works, but to also be motivated to implement some of those changes. And West Baltimore, as we know, like most metropolitan cities, we're at the top of the charts for a lot of things we don't want to be.
That's right.
But
That's right.
we have the ability as a community to make these changes, and including this conversation. Someone's going to hear this conversation and decide to reevaluate their health. Um, the diabetes prevention program, just knowing your connection to it, it's a program dear to my heart. We see a number of women who are able to get their A1C back to normal levels, even within the first 4 months of our program. But that these simple changes, as you mentioned, it does not take a lot. And so, what we want to do is encourage our listeners to replay this, put it on rewind, put Dr. Cheatham on your television, put them on your smart device, and listen to this on repeat to gain inspiration. And just know that this conversation doesn't end here. We'll continue to talk about the amazing work that the West Baltimore Health Initiative is doing. As you know, we're working closely, Amani Nicol Wellness, with women in a wellness space in the community. So we're not just talking about this stuff, we're equipped to actually help you make things happen or make sure that we put you in the right source. So, Dr. Cheatham, as we wrap up, would you like to share anything that you would like our listeners to know? Is there a takeaway?
Well, the takeaway should be this: look at your background, understand that certain groups of people in North America and in other geographical areas of the world are at greater risk for certain types of metabolic disorders because of a change that has taken place in their lifestyle or in their habits that they were not originally responsible for, but which they can now control. I'm looking right now on my second computer screen at what we call a heat map. A heat map tells us where there's a concentration of greater risk and likelihood on the basis of total numbers of people who are there. And we look at that heat map and it shows us where the propensity for diabetes, sudden cardiac death, stroke, amputations, and kidney disease centered in our current population. And what it shows is for the population of people of color in this country, the areas from which these people have heritage and came from extend all the way from Texas and West Texas through Louisiana and Arkansas and Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and up into Virginia, the same areas where years and years ago, hundreds of years ago, many of our ancestors were brought as slaves. And now we find ourselves in 2025 on a heat map at risk because of that linkage to heritage. But we can change it. We don't have to have those things happen to us anymore. And if they happen to us and we let them happen to us, then if we're educated and know, we can't blame anybody else. We just have to get on the system and learn to change ourselves. So that's it.
That was powerful and appreciated. Well, I thank you, and I'll even on behalf of those who I know will tune in and those who will continue to run this on repeat, that I thank you again, Dr. Cheatham, for your time, for your hard work, for your efforts, and I'm looking forward to this next project.
Okay, great.
Someday.
Bye-bye.